Hello, my name is Scott Blake. I am 38 years old. I am currently a freelance graphic designer living in Columbus, Ohio, a vibrant city that still retains the simplicity of the American Midwest, streets lined with oak trees, neighborhoods with white picket fences, and the sound of children laughing every afternoon. From the outside, my life might seem like a tranquil painting, but inside, it's a storm. I have a father, Marvin Blake, a former Iraq War veteran who was once my role model but is now just a faded shadow, ravaged by the scars of war that never heal. I sit here in my small suburban Columbus home listening to the patter of rain on the porch, trying to piece together the fragments of my memories. My story is not a fairy tale. It doesn't have a dreamy, perfect ending, at least not yet. It's a story about family, responsibility, heart-wrenching choices, and how I lost everything in an attempt to hold on to one person: my father. It all began 3 years ago when I made a decision that, looking back, I'm not sure was right or wrong. My father, Marvin, was once a strong, towering man with a smile that could light up an entire room. He was a soldier, a hero in my childhood eyes. But the Iraq War took him away, not his body, but his soul. He returned from the battlefield with post-traumatic stress disorder. The military calls it PTSD. This condition is an invisible monster that gnaws at my father's mind day by day. Nightmares, sudden panic attacks, screams in the middle of the night. All of these turned the father I loved into a stranger. My mother, the most patient woman I've ever known, tried her best. She stayed up all night when he screamed, trying to pull him out of his horrific memories. But one day she couldn't take it anymore. I still remember the day she packed her bags, her eyes red but resolute. "Scott," she said, her voice trembling, "I love your father, but I can't live like this forever. I'm sorry." She left, leaving my father alone in a small house in Zanesville, Ohio. A small town where veterans make up a significant portion of the population, where sad stories of war seem to seep into every brick. I don't blame my mother. I understand her. But I couldn't abandon my father. He was the one who taught me how to ride a bike, held me when I fell, and told me stories of courage. I couldn't leave him alone, even if it meant facing what my mother couldn't endure. "You're crazy, Scott," Natalie, my wife, almost shouted when I told her I wanted to bring my father to live with us. We were standing in the kitchen, the warm yellow light illuminating her face, but her eyes were full of worry. "You know how he is. We have a young child, have you forgotten? I don't want our son to be scared in his own home." Natalie wasn't wrong. Our son, Evan, was only 7 years old, a sensitive boy who loved to draw and often asked me innocent questions about the world. I didn't want him to witness his grandfather's panic attacks. But I also couldn't turn my back on my father. "Honey," I took her hand, trying to keep my voice calm, "just for a while. I'll figure something out. I can't leave him to live alone. He needs me." She shook her head, her lips pressed tightly together. "You always choose the things that hurt you, Scott, and this time, you'll drag our whole family down with you." I didn't want to believe her. I thought I could control everything. I was wrong. My father moved in on a rainy October day. He walked into the house, his back hunched, his eyes sunken, carrying an old suitcase and a few boxes of medication. "Thank you, Scott," he said, his voice hoarse. It was the first time in years I saw him smile, even if it was just a faint one. I thought maybe things would be okay. But just a few weeks later, I realized I had underestimated the monster in my father's mind. The first night he had an episode, I was sleeping when a scream tore through the silence. I rushed downstairs, my heart pounding, only to find my father standing in the middle of the living room, eyes wide, sweating profusely, holding a chair as if ready to smash something. "They're coming! They're coming!" he shouted, his voice frantic. I tried to hold him, but he pushed me away so hard I fell to the floor. Natalie ran downstairs, Evan hiding behind her, his eyes wide with fear. "Scott, do something!" Natalie cried, her voice trembling. I tried to calm my father, saying meaningless words just to pull him back to reality. Eventually, he collapsed into a chair, gasping for air as if he had just escaped a nightmare. But that nightmare never truly left. Nights like that became routine. Some nights he only screamed. Other nights he smashed things. A vase Natalie loved, a family photo frame, even the table lamp I bought when we first got married. Each time I saw Natalie's eyes grow more distant. She started sleeping separately, taking Evan to the attic so he wouldn't hear the screams. I tried to talk to her, but she just shook her head. "Don't you see, Scott? We're losing each other." I didn't want to believe my family was falling apart. I thought if I tried harder, I could hold everything together. I took my father to a psychiatrist, got him medication, even installed safety locks on his bedroom door so he couldn't wander at night. But nothing changed the truth. My father was a storm, and I was trying to keep a sinking ship afloat. One evening, after my father had another episode and broke the bathroom mirror, Natalie pulled me out to the backyard. The rain had stopped, but the air was still heavy and cold. She stood there, arms crossed, her eyes no longer angry but filled with sadness. "I can't do this anymore, Scott," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "I've tried. I know you love your father, but Evan and I can't live like this. I'm moving out." I felt the ground collapse beneath me. "Natalie, please." I grabbed her hand, but she gently pulled away. "Don't do this. I'll find a way. I promise." "How many times have you promised?" she asked, her voice choking. "I love you, Scott, but I have to protect our son, and you're destroying yourself." The next day, Natalie and Evan moved out, taking suitcases filled with clothes and our memories. I stood at the door watching her drive away, feeling like a part of my heart was being torn apart. Evan looked back, waving at me through the window, his sad smile like a knife to my chest. The weeks that followed were a blur. I called Natalie, texted her, begged her to reconsider. But she only responded briefly. "I need time, Scott." I knew she didn't just need time. She needed a life free from my father's nightmares. I didn't blame her, but that didn't ease the pain. Every night I lay in bed listening to my father muttering in the next room. Sometimes he was lucid, telling me about his days in Iraq, about the friends he lost. Other times he looked at me with empty eyes, as if I weren't his son but a stranger. I wondered, what am I doing? Why am I still here when everything I love is gone? But then I remembered my father as he used to be. The man who held me, taught me how to tie my shoes, cried when I graduated college. I couldn't abandon him. Not because I'm strong, but because I couldn't bear the thought of giving up on the father who once meant everything to me. I stand in front of the mirror looking at my own tired eyes. I chose to stay by my father's side even at the cost of my family's happiness. I thought I could endure, that I could fix everything. But I didn't know that in this journey I would lose more than I ever imagined. My story doesn't end here. It's only just begun, and what happens next will force me to face the most painful truths about family, loyalty, and myself. The days after Natalie and Evan left, the house became an empty shell. Evan's laughter, the gentle bickering between Natalie and me over who would do the dishes, all of it was gone, replaced by a suffocating silence. It was just me and my father, along with his nightmares, filling every corner of the house. I told myself I had to be strong, that this was the right thing to do. But every morning when I looked in the mirror, I saw a stranger. A man with dark circles under his eyes, disheveled hair, and an unnamed sadness clinging to him. I could no longer work full-time at the graphic design company. The long days at the office, the endless meetings were incompatible with taking care of my father. I quit my job and switched to freelancing, taking on small projects so I could stay home more. Money was tight, but I thought I could manage. I was used to living frugally from my college days, and I believed that with enough effort I could keep everything under control. But caring for my father was unlike any job I'd ever had. It wasn't just about taking him to the doctor or making sure he took his medication on time. It was the sleepless nights, sitting by his bedside as he screamed through nightmares, calling out the names of soldiers who died 2 decades ago. It was the times I had to rush into his room holding him tightly as he tried to smash things, or when he looked at me with wild eyes as if I were the enemy. Once he called me Hassan, the name of some soldier from his unit, and shouted for me to get down or they'll shoot. I held him, whispering, "Dad, it's me, Scott, no one's shooting." But those words rarely brought him back to reality. One night, about 3 months after Natalie left, I was sitting in the kitchen, my laptop open in front of me, trying to finish a design project for a client. The clock showed nearly 2 in the morning, but I didn't dare sleep. My father had just had a panic attack, and I was afraid he'd wake up and wander the house. I heard slow, shuffling footsteps from the hallway. He walked in, his eyes bloodshot, but this time it wasn't a nightmare. He looked at me, his voice hoarse. "Why aren't you asleep, Scott? You planning to sit there watching me like I'm a prisoner?" I tried to smile, though my heart felt heavy. "I just want to make sure you're okay, Dad." He snorted and sat down across from me. "You don't need to pull this stunt. I'm not a child. I lived alone in Zanesville for years and I was fine." "Dad," I said softly, "I want you here. I want to take care of you." He looked at me, his gaze cold and sharp. "You think you're a hero, huh? You quit your job, let your wife and kid leave just to stay here playing the dutiful son. You're a fool, Scott." His words cut like a knife. I wanted to argue, to scream that I had sacrificed everything for him. But I stayed silent, clenching my fists under the table. He stood up, muttered something, and shuffled back to his room. I sat there, listening to the rain outside the window, wondering if I was doing the right thing. The months that followed felt like an endless loop. I took my father to therapy twice a week, though he often refused to cooperate with the doctor. "They don't know anything," he'd say, his voice dripping with contempt. "They weren't there. They didn't see what I saw." I tried to explain that they only wanted to help, but he'd just shake his head, his eyes distant. There were days when he was lucid, and I caught glimpses of the father I once knew. He'd talk about his time in the military, about the friends he lost, about how he once thought he was invincible. Those moments were rare, but they were why I kept going. I thought if I was patient enough, I might find my father again, the man who once meant everything to me. But when he wasn't lucid, he became someone else. He was irritable, blaming me for everything, from the house being too cold to the bitter taste of his medication. Once he threw a coffee mug at the wall just because I forgot to add sugar. "You can't do anything right," he shouted. I cleaned up the broken pieces, fighting back tears, telling myself he didn't mean it. He was just in pain, and I was the only one here to bear the brunt of his anger. While I was drowning in the chaos of caring for my father, my younger brother, Bryce, lived a completely different life. 4 years younger than me, Bryce was working for a tech company in Seattle. He was successful, making good money, and occasionally called to check on Dad. Those calls were always brief, polite, and inevitably ended with him sending an expensive gift, a leather jacket, a bottle of premium whiskey, or a watch Dad never wore. Dad loved those gifts. He'd show them off to me, his eyes lighting up. "Bryce knows how to make me happy," he'd say. "He's got more sense than you." His words hurt, but I tried not to take it personally. Bryce wasn't here dealing with the nightmares or cleaning up spilled water in the living room. He could send gifts, but I was the one who stayed. I thought if I kept trying, Dad would see it. He'd understand that I was doing all of this for him. But one evening, as I was washing dishes, my father walked into the kitchen with his phone in hand. "Bryce just called," he said, his voice brimming with pride. "He's about to get a promotion. You should take a page out of your brother's book." I stopped washing, the cold water running over my hands. "I'm happy for Bryce," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But inside I felt a crack. I had given up my job, my family, my dreams to be here, taking care of him. And Bryce, with a few minutes on the phone and a couple of gifts, had won my father's heart. As time passed, I began to feel like a shadow. I worked on freelance projects at night when my father was asleep. I slept fitfully, always ready to wake up if I heard him scream. I called Natalie every week trying to stay connected with Evan, but the calls grew shorter. Natalie was busy with her new job, and Evan started speaking to me with a distant tone, as if I were an old acquaintance rather than his father. I tried to find joy in small things, a hot cup of coffee in the morning, an old song on the radio, or a text from Natalie saying Evan was doing fine. But those moments weren't enough to fill the void in my heart. I began to wonder, what am I doing with my life? I sacrificed everything, but for what? A father who didn't see what I was doing, a family that had drifted away, and a future that felt uncertain. One night, as I sat in the living room staring at a laptop screen blurred by exhaustion, my phone buzzed. It was Bryce. I answered, hoping he'd ask about me, say something to make me feel less alone. But he only asked about Dad, his voice flat. "How's he doing? I called last night and he said you were too busy to take good care of him." I gripped the phone, trying to stay calm. "He's fine," I said. "What about you, Bryce? When are you coming to visit Dad?" He laughed, a light but cold laugh. "I'm swamped. The company's crazy right now, but I just sent Dad a new pair of shoes. He loves them." I hung up without saying more. I looked around the dark room, listening to my father's soft snoring from the next room. I wondered, does anyone see what I'm doing? Does anyone understand that I'm trying, even though I'm so exhausted I feel like collapsing? My sacrifices went unnoticed, not by my father, not by Bryce, and not even by Natalie, who was no longer here to share the burden. I began to feel utterly alone, as if the world had forgotten me. But I kept going because I believed it was the right thing to do. I didn't know that just ahead, an even more painful truth was waiting, a truth that would force me to question everything I had sacrificed. 3 years. 3 long, endless years have passed since I brought my father to live with me. I had grown accustomed to sleepless nights, to his screams, to Natalie's distant gaze during our phone calls, and to the constant praise my father heaped on Bryce. I thought I had become numb, that nothing could hurt me anymore. But I was wrong. One evening everything changed, not with a raging storm, but with a single phone call, a quiet moment that was enough to tear my heart apart. I was in my study trying to wrap up the day's unfinished work. My father was in his bedroom watching TV, the expensive flat screen Bryce had sent a few months ago. The sound of the evening news droned on, occasionally interrupted by his muttering. I had grown used to leaving him alone during these rare moments of lucidity. I thought I could steal a few minutes to rest, just to regain some strength. But as I passed by his room, I noticed the door wasn't fully closed. And then I heard his voice, not talking to the TV, but to someone on the phone. His voice was low, almost a whisper, but filled with an excitement I hadn't heard from him in a long time. I didn't mean to eavesdrop. I was just passing by to grab a glass of water from the fridge. Then one of his sentences stopped me in my tracks. "Bryce, don't worry. My retirement account and the house in Zanesville, I'm leaving them to you. I trust you'll make the Blake name proud." I froze, the glass in my hand nearly slipping to the floor. The retirement account, the money he had saved from his years in the military, the money I had carefully helped him manage to ensure he could live comfortably. The house in Zanesville, where he had lived alone, where I grew up, where memories of the father I once admired were held. All of it, he was leaving to Bryce? I forced myself to stay still, straining to hear more, though each word felt like a stab. Bryce said something on the other end, his voice smooth and persuasive. "Dad, you're doing the right thing. I'll use that money to take my family to the next level. Just trust me." His family? I felt the blood rush to my head. Bryce, who only showed up through brief phone calls, who sent gifts to win Dad over, who never had to stay up all night soothing him through nightmares. He was the one Dad chose. I had sacrificed everything, my job, my marriage, my time with my son, to be here taking care of him. And now, he was choosing Bryce? I don't know how long I stood there, only that when I walked into the room, my father flinched and quickly hung up the phone. "Scott," he said, his voice slightly trembling. "Why are you standing there? Were you eavesdropping on me?" I looked at him, trying to keep my voice steady, though a storm was raging inside me. "What did you just tell Bryce? About the retirement account? About the house?" He frowned, his gaze shifting away. "That's my business. What I choose to leave to whom is my right." "You're right?" I let out a laugh, but it was a bitter one. "Dad, I gave up everything to be here, to take care of you. I lost my job, my family, my wife, and my son. And now you're saying you'll leave everything to Bryce? The guy who never shows up, who never has to deal with your screams or your outbursts." He stood up, slowly but with palpable anger. "Don't you raise your voice at me. You chose to bring me here. I didn't force you. And Bryce? He knows how to make me proud. He's successful. He has a future. And you're just a failure, sitting here whining about what you've lost." His words hit like a slap. I stood there, stunned, feeling the world crumble beneath my feet. A failure. That's how he saw me? After everything I'd done? I wanted to scream, to smash something, to force him to see my sacrifices. But I just stood there, silent, because I knew that no matter what I said, he wouldn't understand. I went back to my room, closed the door, and sat on the bed. The room was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the desk lamp. I looked at the family photo on the dresser. Me, Natalie, and Evan smiling brightly during a trip to the park a few years ago. The photo now felt like a cruel reminder of what I had traded away. My career, once a source of pride, was now reduced to rushed freelance projects. My marriage, once my refuge, was broken. And Evan, the boy I loved more than anything, now only saw me through brief phone calls, his eyes growing more distant with each one. I wondered, what did I do wrong? I chose to stay for my father, for duty, for the memories of the man who was once my hero. But now, I realized he was no longer that man. He was a stranger, someone ready to turn his back on me to favor Bryce, the one who only knew how to win him over with flashy gifts. I picked up my phone, my fingers hovering over my mother's number. I didn't call her often because every time we talked, she reminded me that I needed to live for myself. But that night, I needed someone to listen. When she answered, her voice was gentle but worried. "Scott, what's wrong, son?" I told her everything, about Dad's call with Bryce, the words he said, the betrayal tearing me apart. She was quiet for a moment, then spoke, her voice firm. "Scott, I told you before. You can't live your whole life sacrificing for someone who doesn't appreciate it. Your father, he's made his choices. You have to make yours. Don't let him drag you down any further." Her words were like a light in the darkness. I knew she was right, but I was still afraid. Afraid that if I let go, I'd lose the last shred of hope of finding the father I once knew. But that night, as I hung up the phone, a decision began to form in my mind. I couldn't keep going like this. I couldn't let my life slip away in meaningless sacrifices. I started that very night. I opened my laptop and found the number of a friend in real estate named Tom. I texted him, short but clear. "Tom, I want to sell the house in Columbus. Price it a bit below market, sell it fast. Can you help me?" I didn't want to drag it out. This house, once a home for me, Natalie, and Evan, was now just a shell holding painful memories. I didn't want to keep it anymore, didn't want to hold on to anything tying me to those past years. Tom replied the next morning, his voice surprised over the phone. "Scott, are you sure? That house is nice and the market value is solid. Why sell it cheap?" "I need a fresh start," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Just do it, I trust you." Tom agreed and we settled on a price, about 5% below market value. I knew I'd lose some money, but I didn't care. Money couldn't buy back what I'd lost, and it couldn't buy my future either. I wanted to cut all ties with the past. Over the next few days, I began packing up my things. I did it quietly when my father was asleep or sitting in front of the TV. I packed clothes, work documents, the few personal items I had left. Each thing I touched brought back a memory. The sweater Natalie gave me for Christmas, the children's book I used to read to Evan every night, the painting I made with him one rainy afternoon. I didn't cry, but each time I sealed a box, my heart tightened. I wasn't just leaving the house. I was leaving a part of myself. My father didn't notice. He lived in his own world, caught between nightmares and rare moments of clarity. I didn't tell him about my plans, not because I feared he'd stop me, but because I knew he wouldn't care. He had chosen Bryce, chosen his flashy promises over my quiet sacrifices. I didn't want to argue, didn't want to explain, I just wanted to leave. The night before I left, I sat at the kitchen table under the dim yellow light and wrote a letter to my father. I held the pen, my hand slightly trembling, trying to find the right words. I didn't want to blame him, didn't want to leave behind bitterness. I just wanted to say goodbye, as gently as I could. Dear Dad, I wrote, I've tried my best to take care of you, to keep you safe and healthy. I don't regret it because you're my father and I'll always love you. But I can't keep living like this. I need to find my own life again. I hope you stay healthy. I hope you find peace. I'm not angry with you. I just hope one day you'll understand. Your son, Scott. I folded the letter and placed it on the table next to his favorite coffee mug. I looked around the house one last time. The living room where Evan used to run around, the kitchen where Natalie cooked warm meals, the hallway where I held my father through his panic attacks. Then I picked up my suitcase, walked out the door, and locked it behind me. A light rain was falling, the air oppressively quiet. I got in the car, drove off into the darkness, and didn't look back. I found a small apartment in downtown Columbus, just a few blocks from my old design company. The apartment wasn't anything special. A cramped living room, a tiny kitchen corner, and a bedroom just big enough for a single bed. But when I stepped inside and set my suitcase on the floor, I felt a strange sense of relief. This was my own place, where I could start over, free from the screams and painful memories. The first few days in the new apartment, I tried to adjust to the silence. No more of my father's screams, no more sleepless nights. I reached out to my old company, asking if they had any projects for me. My former boss, a kind man named Mark, agreed to let me come back part-time. You were always one of the best, Scott, he said. Welcome back. I felt a small spark of hope. Maybe I still had a chance to rebuild my life. But deep down, I carried a lingering pain, not just because of my father, but because of how he and Bryce saw me. I waited for a call, a text, any sign that they recognized what I had done. But there was nothing. Not a word from my father, not a message from Bryce. They looked down on me as if I were a failure, someone not worth their concern. A week later, Tom called. Scott, we've got a buyer for the house. Price has agreed, they want to sign the contract this week. I nodded over the phone, feeling as if a weight had been lifted from my chest. Thanks, Tom, I said. Get it done as fast as you can. The sale went smoothly. I used the money to pay off debts, cover the apartment rent, and send a small amount to Natalie to help with Evan. I didn't want her to think I'd abandoned our son, but I didn't tell her about what happened between me and my father. I wasn't ready to face that yet. Then one morning my phone buzzed. It was my father. I stared at the screen, my heart racing. Part of me wanted to ignore it, but I picked up. His voice came through, full of anger. Scott, what the hell are you doing? You sold the house in Columbus? You think you have the right to do that? I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. Dad, that was my house. I had the right to decide. I left you a letter. Did you read it? Letter? What letter? He snapped. You left me here without a word and sold the house like I don't exist? You're an ungrateful son. I gripped the phone, feeling 3 years of pain well up in my chest. Dad, I said, my voice firm, I took care of you for 3 years. I lost everything, my wife, my son, my job, everything, to be there for you. But you chose Bryce, the one who's never here. I don't blame you, but I can't keep doing this. I've done enough. He went silent, only his heavy breathing coming through the phone. Then he said, his voice cold, You'll regret this, Scott. You'll see. I hung up, my hands trembling. That was the first time I felt I had truly cut the cord with him. not just by leaving the house, but by severing the father-son bond I once thought was unbreakable. I sat down, looking out the window at the morning sunlight filtering through. I didn't cry, but I felt a vast emptiness inside, as if I had lost something forever. In the days that followed, I tried to focus on my new life. I worked more, started reconnecting with old friends, and even called Natalie more often. She still kept her distance, but her voice was less cold. "Evan misses you," she said once. "He keeps asking when he can see his dad." Her words were like medicine, giving me hope that I still had a chance with my son. But deep down, I knew my journey wasn't over. I had left my father, but the story between us still had knots left untied. And Bryce, my younger brother, whom I once loved and protected, was still an unhealed wound. I didn't know that just a few months later things would take a turn for the worse, when the truth about Bryce came to light, and my father would have to face the consequences of his choices. The small apartment in downtown Columbus became my sanctuary. It wasn't luxurious or cozy like the old house, but it was mine, a place where I could breathe without feeling suffocated by memories or responsibilities. I began rebuilding my life, one small step at a time, like someone learning to walk again after a storm. The first thing I did was call Natalie, not to beg her to come back, but just to hear her voice, to know Evan was okay. "Scott," she answered over the phone, her tone gentle but still cautious. "Evan asked about you yesterday. He wants to know if you'll come to his piano recital." My heart tightened, a mix of pain and warmth. "I'll be there," I said without hesitation. "Just tell me when and I'll be there." We arranged to meet that weekend at Evan's school. I arrived early, standing in a corner of the auditorium, watching my 7-year-old son sit at the piano, his small hands gliding over the keys. Evan's playing wasn't perfect. He missed a few notes, but to me it was the most beautiful music I'd ever heard. When the recital ended, I rushed to hug him. "I'm so proud of you," I whispered, feeling the warmth of his small body in my arms. He looked up, his smile radiant. "Will you come to the next one, Dad?" "Absolutely," I promised, though I knew each promise now carried more weight than ever. Natalie stood a few steps away, watching us with a gentle expression. "Thanks for coming," she said as we walked outside. "Evan needs you." "I need both of you," I replied, my voice hoarse. I didn't dare say more, afraid of ruining the fragile moment. But when I looked into Natalie's eyes, I saw a glimmer of hope, not a promise of reconciliation, but a sign that she hadn't completely closed her heart to me. I returned to my old company, starting part-time before being offered a full-time position. Mark, my boss, was a straightforward but fair man. "You've always had discipline, Scott," he said during a meeting. "And you're honest. We need people like you." His praise made me feel self-conscious, but it also made me feel like I was reclaiming a part of my old self. The man who was once confident in his abilities, who had dreams and goals. While I worked to rebuild my life, I heard that my father had moved back to the house in Zanesville. It was where he felt most comfortable. I wasn't surprised by that. But what did surprise me was Bryce. He started showing up more often, not just over the phone, but in person, visiting Dad. A neighbor next to Dad's house told me that Bryce was coming by unusually often. He'd arrive in a sleek car, dressed in a sharp suit, bringing expensive gifts, a new armchair, a high-end speaker system, even a spa voucher Dad would never use. Dad seemed thrilled by it. "Bryce is a good son," he bragged to the neighbor, his voice full of pride. "He cares about me, unlike Scott." Those words, even secondhand, stung. But I tried not to dwell on them. I had chosen to walk away, to live for myself. If Dad wanted to believe Bryce was the perfect son, that was his right. I only hoped he'd find peace, though deep down I knew the truth would soon come to light. Months passed, and I thought I'd moved on from the pain my father and Bryce had caused. But then I heard that Dad had mortgaged the house in Zanesville. I didn't know the details, only that Bryce had convinced him to do it, claiming the money would fund a big business venture. Dad, with blind faith in his youngest son, Not only mortgaged the house, but also handed over his entire military pension to Bryce. I learned this from a mutual friend of Bryce and mine who called me out of concern. "Scott, do you know about this? Bryce got a huge sum of money. He's making risky investments. I'm not sure, but it doesn't look good. You should talk to your brother." I sighed, feeling a storm brewing. "Thanks for telling me," I replied, "but there's nothing I can do." I didn't want to get involved, not because I didn't care, but because I was exhausted from trying to save my father from himself. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about him, the man who was once my hero, now placing his trust in someone who was only using him. Then everything started to collapse faster than I expected. Bryce, after getting the money from the pension and the mortgage, began visiting less frequently. Dad called him, but Bryce was always busy. A critical meeting, a business trip, a new project. The expensive gifts stopped coming. Dad, still hopeful at first, began to notice the change. He called me once, his voice frail. "Scott, Bryce is really busy. He's probably working on something big." I didn't say anything, just nodded over the phone, though I knew Bryce wasn't busy. He had taken what he wanted and left. Dad's panic attacks returned, worse than before. Without me there to help, he had to face them alone. He called Bryce during his episodes, but Bryce rarely showed up. Once the neighbor told me Dad had fallen during a panic attack, hitting his head on a table, but Bryce didn't come despite dozens of messages. Dad began to see the truth, that the golden son he always praised had abandoned him. Then the worst happened. The house in Zanesville was foreclosed on by the bank. Dad couldn't keep up with the loan payments, and Bryce, who had promised to handle everything, had disappeared completely. I got the news from Tom, my real estate friend. "Scott, your dad's house. It's been repossessed. The bank's putting it up for sale. Your dad has nowhere to go." I sank into a chair, feeling the weight of the world on my shoulders. I pictured my father, once a proud man, now homeless, wandering in Zanesville, the place he called home. Part of me wanted to rush to him to help him, as I had for 3 years. But another part, the part that had been hurt too much, held me back. Then Dad called. His voice over the phone was weak, almost pleading. "Scott, son, I don't have a home anymore. Bryce, he's not here. I need your help." I gripped the phone, my heart pounding. I wanted to scream, to ask why he chose Bryce, why he saw me as a failure. But I only said, my voice cold, "Dad, I did everything I could for you. I can't keep going. You chose Bryce. Let him help you now." "Scott, please," he whispered, but I hung up before he could finish. I sat in my small apartment, listening to the rain outside the window. I didn't cry, but I felt a deep pain, as if I had just closed the final door to him. I continued my life, trying not to think about my father. I saw Evan more often, our afternoons playing ball or eating ice cream becoming a healing balm. Natalie started talking to me more, even inviting me over for dinner once. "You look better," she said, her eyes soft. "I'm glad you're finding yourself again." But deep down, I knew the story with my father wasn't truly over. He had lost everything, and though I refused to help, I couldn't stop thinking about him. I didn't know that just a few months later, an event would bring us face to face one last time, and I would have to decide whether I could forgive him or myself. In the months after I hung up, refusing my father's plea, I tried to bury his memory in a deep corner of my mind. I poured my energy into work, into afternoons with Evan, into increasingly longer calls with Natalie. My life began to regain some color, faint hues, but enough to make me feel like I was living, not just existing. But every night when the small apartment grew quiet, the image of my father, a once proud man, now homeless and abandoned, haunted me like a ghost. I didn't know exactly how my father was living. The neighbor in Zanesville called me a few times, saying they'd seen him wandering near the park wearing an old coat, muttering to himself. "He looks bad, Scott," they said. "Like he's lost all hope." I listened, nodded over the phone, but didn't promise to do anything. "I've done enough," I told myself. But every time I hung up, a sharp pain stabbed my chest as if I were betraying myself. Meanwhile, I heard about Bryce through a mutual friend. He had moved to another city, living in a fancy apartment, but the business venture he promised my father never materialized. I heard he was spending lavishly, making bad investments. There were even rumors he owed a large sum to some shady organization. I wasn't surprised. Bryce was always good at making grand promises, but never at keeping them. Then one night my phone buzzed at nearly 3 in the morning. I jolted awake, heart pounding, thinking something had happened to Evan. But the number was from a hospital in Zanesville. "Mr. Scott Blake?" a nurse's gentle voice came through. "Your father, Marvin Blake, was just brought in. He fell during a panic attack, sustaining a head injury and a broken hip. Can you come right away?" I sat up, my mind reeling. I wanted to refuse, to say I was no longer responsible for him. But the image of my father lying in a hospital bed with no one by his side made it impossible to turn away. "I'll be there," I said, my voice hoarse, then hurriedly threw on clothes and grabbed my car keys. The drive to Zanesville took over an hour, but to me it felt like a lifetime. I remembered the years of caring for my father, the sleepless nights, the times he called me a failure. But I also recalled the rare moments when he was lucid, when he spoke of his military days with a spark in his eyes, the father I once knew. I didn't know what I'd say when I saw him, but I knew I had to go. When I walked into the hospital room, the cold white light made me shiver. My father lay on the bed, one side of his head bandaged, his leg in a cast, looking smaller and frailer than ever. He opened his eyes at the sound of my footsteps, and for a moment I saw a flicker in his gaze, not anger, not panic, but relief. "Scott," he whispered, his voice weak. "You came. That's good." I sat down in the chair beside his bed, unsure of what to say. "How are you, Dad?" I asked, though the question felt pointless. He closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. "I was wrong, Scott. Wrong about everything." I froze, not expecting those words. In my memory, I had never heard him admit to any mistake. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling. He turned to look at me, his eyes red. "Bryce. He only wanted my money. He promised he'd take care of me, make the family proud. But when I needed him, he wasn't there. I called, he didn't answer. I fell, he didn't come. And you took care of me for 3 years, and I treated you terribly." His words were like a knife, both painful and liberating. I wanted to shout, to tell him how hard I'd tried, how I'd sacrificed everything only for him to call me a failure. But I stayed silent, letting him continue. "I'm sorry, Scott," he said, his voice choking. Tears rolled down his gaunt cheeks. "I was blind. I thought Bryce would succeed, would take care of me, but you were the one who stayed. I don't deserve you." My throat tightened. I had waited years for this apology, but now, hearing it, I didn't feel triumphant. I only felt pain. For him. For me. For what we'd lost. "Dad," I said, my voice hoarse, "I don't want your apology. I just want you to be okay." He took my hand, his trembling. "Can I come live with you? I won't bother you anymore, I promise." I looked into his eyes, seeing the desperation, the fragility of a man who was once my hero. But I shook my head. "I can't, Dad. I've done everything I could. I need to live for myself, for Evan, for my family." He nodded, saying nothing, but I saw his eyes dim. I didn't know if he understood or just accepted it. But in that moment, for the first time in years, I felt we were truly talking. Not through anger or panic, but as father and son. My father was discharged from the hospital after 2 weeks. I didn't bring him to my apartment, but I couldn't leave him to wander the streets either. I found a nursing home on the outskirts of Columbus, a clean, quiet place with staff trained to care for people with PTSD like my father. I covered the costs, even though it meant working extra hours to make up for it. I didn't do it out of duty, but because I wanted him to have a safe place, even if I no longer had the strength to care for him directly. The day I took my father to the nursing home, he didn't protest. He sat in the wheelchair, staring out the window, silent. When we arrived, I wheeled him into his new room, a small space with a window overlooking a flower garden. "Is this place okay, Dad?" I asked. He nodded, his voice low. "It's fine, thank you, Scott." From then on, I visited him once a week. I brought coffee, sometimes an old book he liked. We talked, not much, but enough to maintain a fragile connection. I no longer let him be the center of my life. "Dad," I said once when he asked why I didn't visit more often, "I love you, but you're not my everything anymore. I have Evan, Natalie, and my own life." He looked at me, his eyes sad but unresisting. "I understand," he said. "I hope you find happiness again." At the nursing home, my father began to stabilize. He attended therapy regularly, took his medication on time, and his panic attacks became less frequent. The nurses said he started sharing stories, even joking with others in the facility. I was glad, not because I had saved him, but because he was finally finding some peace. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my relationship with Natalie and Evan. I invited them to dinner, to movies, or just for walks in the park. Evan loved telling me about school and his new friends, and I listened, trying to make up for the years I'd been absent. Natalie, initially cautious, gradually opened up. One evening, after dropping Evan off, she took my hand. "Scott," she said, "I know you've been through a lot of pain. I'm not sure we can go back to how things were, but I want to try. From the beginning." I looked into her eyes, my heart pounding. "I want that too," I said. "From the beginning." We started dating again slowly, like two people meeting for the first time. There were awkward moments, small arguments, but also evenings filled with laughter and embraces under the soft glow of my apartment's lights. I didn't dare hope for too much, but I knew that this time I wouldn't let her slip away. The months that followed were a time when I learned to love again. Not just Natalie, but myself. She and I didn't rush to return to how things were, didn't try to patch up what was broken. Instead, we built something new step by step with honesty and patience. We took Evan to the park, had dinners together on weekends, and sometimes just sat on the couch talking about small things, from Evan's school tests to a new movie she liked. Those moments, though simple, were a balm that healed the wounds within me. Evan, my little boy, now 9 years old, started calling me Daddy with a closeness I once feared I'd lost forever. One afternoon, while we were playing basketball in Natalie's backyard, he suddenly asked, "Dad, how's Grandpa doing?" "I miss him." His question stopped me in my tracks. I hadn't spoken much about my father, not wanting painful memories to overshadow Evan's joy. But the curiosity in his eyes made me realize I couldn't keep avoiding it. "Grandpa's in a good place," I said, forcing a smile. "One day I'll take you to visit him, okay?" Evan nodded, threw the ball into the hoop, and his smile seemed to chase away the chill of early autumn. I knew I had to keep that promise, not just for Evan, but because I needed to face my father. Not as a son running away, but as a man who had found himself again. While I worked on rebuilding my family, rumors about Bryce began to circulate. An old friend from Seattle called me, his voice laced with concern. "Scott, have you heard about Bryce? He's in deep trouble." From what my friend shared, I learned that the business venture Bryce had used Dad's money for had failed spectacularly. He had borrowed from shady sources, underground organizations operating outside the law, and when he couldn't pay, he went into hiding. No one knew exactly where Bryce was, but rumors said he was being hunted, living like a fugitive. I didn't feel satisfaction hearing this. I had been angry at Bryce, hurt by how he used our father, but now I only felt pity. Bryce was once the little brother I loved, the one I protected when we were kids, the one I shared youthful dreams with. But he had chosen his path, and now he was paying the price. I didn't try to contact him. I knew that even if I did, he wouldn't listen. Part of me hoped he'd be okay, but I no longer had the strength to save anyone but myself. One autumn afternoon, when the golden oak leaves blanketed the streets of Columbus, I decided to take Evan to visit my father. Natalie agreed, though she was still worried. "Are you sure, Scott?" she asked, holding my hand. "I don't want you to get hurt again." "I'm okay," I said, squeezing her hand gently. I need to do this for Evan and for myself. We drove to the nursing home where my father was living. The autumn air was crisp and the gentle sunlight filtering through the trees gave me a rare sense of peace. Evan sat in the back seat clutching a drawing he made at school. A picture of a house under the sun, with 3 people standing in front of it. I drew this for Grandpa, he said, his voice full of excitement. I smiled, but inside I wasn't sure how my father would react. When we walked into his room, I saw him sitting in his wheelchair looking out the window. He was thinner than the last time I saw him, his hair now completely white, but his eyes no longer held the wildness or anger. Instead, there was a calm acceptance, as if he had come to terms with what life had brought him. "Dad," I called softly. He turned, and when he saw Evan, his eyes lit up. "Evan," he said, his voice hoarse but warm. "You've grown so much." Evan ran to him, hugging him without hesitation. "I drew this for you," he said, handing over the drawing. My father took it, his trembling fingers tracing the clumsy but loving lines. "It's beautiful, grandson," he said, his voice catching. "Thank you." I stood there watching them, feeling a strange sense of relief. Evan told him about school, his basketball team, and the times I took him for ice cream. My father listened, nodding occasionally, a faint smile on his lips. When Evan ran outside to play with a dog at the nursing home, I sat down beside my father. "You've done well with him," he said, watching Evan through the window. "You're a good father, Scott. Much better than I was." His words caught me off guard. I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded. "I'll try," I said. "I want Evan to have a happy life." He turned to look at me, his eyes deep. "I was wrong to treat you the way I did. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know I regret it." I took a deep breath, feeling a weight in my chest dissolve. "Dad," I said, taking his frail hand, "I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I want peace. I don't want to carry this pain anymore." He nodded, his eyes glistening, but he didn't cry. We sat there in silence, no more words needed. For the first time in years, I felt we truly understood each other, not through apologies or arguments, but through the acceptance that we had both done what we thought was right, mistakes and all. A year later, my father passed away. He died in his sleep peacefully, as if he had finally found the rest he longed for. When the nursing home called to tell me, I didn't cry. I felt sadness, but not the gut-wrenching grief of before. It was the sadness of loss, but also relief. My father had lived a turbulent life, and now he was free. I stood before his grave on a cold winter day, my breath turning to mist in the air. Natalie and Evan stood beside me, holding hands. I looked at the headstone engraved with his name, thinking of everything we had been through, the anger, the sacrifices, the moments of forgiveness. "I hope you're at peace," I whispered, unsure if he could hear me. As we left the cemetery, Evan held my hand. "Dad, was Grandpa happy?" he asked. I smiled, ruffling his hair. "I think he was, son. Grandpa found his peace." Looking back on my journey, I realized that life isn't about finding a perfect ending, but about learning to live with the scars. I had lost much, my family, my trust, years of my youth, but I had gained even more. Natalie's love, Evan's smile, and the freedom to live for myself. If I could say one thing to anyone struggling with duty, loyalty, or their own heart, it would be this: love, but don't let that love destroy you. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about allowing yourself to move forward. I forgave my father, not for him, but because I wanted to live a life unshackled by the past. And now, standing beside Natalie and Evan, I know I've found my path, an imperfect one, but mine.